Peter, you want to introduce us to Waterloo Greenway, please?
Yeah, look forward to it. Eugene, thanks for having us. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with this group. I'm going to share my screen, give everybody a quick overview about the project and our ambitions. You know, some of you may have heard some of this before, but many of you may not have. So just want to give you a sense of what we're doing in the big picture. We used to be called the Waller Creek Conservancy. A year ago, we changed our name and rebranded as Waterloo Greenway. Really wanted to have a name that spoke more broadly to our aspirations. The creek, obviously, Waller Creek is an important part of what we're doing, but is one piece of a much greater whole. This is our footprint. So we are a nonprofit organization dedicated and partnering with the city of Austin to create a new parks and public open space system on the east side of downtown. And for those of you that know this part of the city, it is undergoing, like many parts of the city, rapid transformation and change. Our new public space system will obviously catalyze and be add jet fuel to that change, but our aspiration is really much broader. It's really about how do we create a public space system that serves the entire city. And when I say entire, I mean all communities in the city. And so it becomes a kind of a citywide focus and destination where the city can really see itself represented. And being in the center of Austin is really crucial to that mission. Also being on what has historically been the fault line between the east and west sides, and all of the racial and economic segregation that our city has experienced along that fault line. We want to turn this fault line into a zipper, right? Stitching our city back together and using public space to do that.
Hey, Peter,
give us a little bit of historical context. Yeah.
Would you, just for context, back on that previous slide, that the northern boundary is what street?
Yeah. So this is 15th Street up here, right at the foot of UT and the medical school.
Okay.
And then the lake, and then this is obviously I-35 right here.
Thanks,
Eugene. Yeah, so a little historical context that I think informs where we are today and where we need to go. This is the original plan of Austin, sort of, infinitely repeatable grid set to colonize the wilderness of the Western US. But it's, we're here in Austin because of the natural features of this place, the Colorado River at the southern boundary, Shoal Creek at the western boundary, and Waller Creek on the eastern boundary. But as you can see, the plan, while it's inspired by Waller Creek, it doesn't really recognize it. It just steamrolls over it. And we've seen the result of that over time. Waller Creek and the space around it has been subject to intense flood events. And basically, it's always been a marginal, sort of edgy area as a result. So the city recently, in 2011, began construction on the Waller Creek Flood Control Tunnel. And this is really the game changer for this generation's attempt to revitalize Waller Creek and the spaces around it, because it removes 28 acres out of the floodplain around lower Waller Creek downtown. But it also enables us to completely rethink the relationship of the creek itself, the public spaces around the creek, with the city around them. So this was the genesis of a vision of creating a new public space system that would be the armature that really defines the city around it. And it's, so as opposed to thinking about the city as a series of developable parcels with a bunch of green space at the edge, think about the spine as being the thing that comes first, that everything else can organize itself around. And it's, I think, a model of urban design and urban planning that really speaks to our values as a city. We put the environment first, we put people first, we create public spaces that are welcoming, inviting, and then let the city attach themselves to it. We are part of a national movement. This is the High Line, many of you may be familiar with it, of cities that are reinventing themselves through the creation of new public spaces, often built on former industrial sites or pieces of industrial infrastructure. And we've seen the power that these places can have by combining places of nature and all the benefits that provides with tapping into the vitality of the urban fabric around them, and the juxtaposition of those two elements that I think historically we thought are seemingly in conflict. But to see them not as in conflict, but in a managed relationship with one another, this is the future of a sustainable city. And for Austin, it's the future for us too, because it's going to be how we both make life here manageable, how we continue to attract people to this place, and how we tap into what makes Austin, Austin. So there are a few layers to this project. It's not just one thing. At the core of it, it's really about ecology. It's about restoring the ecology of Walla Creek and rehabilitating it. You know, we are the most urban creek in Austin. We show the signs of that, that I think wear and tear over time. Because of the flood control tunnel, we can now take out all of these former concrete embankments that were built to protect the city from flood events, and basically wall the creek off from the city, and basically open the creek back up to the city. Take that armoring out, bend the slopes back, revegetate them, build up this place as a place of nature, and then integrate that into the city fabric around it. So the first layer is ecology. The second layer is really about mobility. It's about how do we create Austin as a more walkable city by carving a pedestrian and cycling trail along Walla Creek that does not come into conflict with any roadways or vehicles, and includes a new pedestrian bridge across the lake, so connecting essentially UT to South Austin with a continuous path, continuous trail. And this mobility corridor, like our other urban trails that are getting built up around the city, I think have a profound effect on the perception of the city by its inhabitants. Because when you can walk places, or you can perceive that you would want to walk places, it shrinks the image of the city in your mind. It makes things that seemed currently disconnected feel connected. No one's walking from UT to the lake right now, but when there is a cool, shaded, beautiful pathway to do that, people will, and it completely changes how people perceive the city, not just those destinations, but everything along that path. So we've got ecology, mobility, and then we have places, a series of parks along this green mobility spine, each of which has its own specific character and function, but the sum of which add up to this very rich tapestry of experiences that can serve the public in a broad set of ways. You know, we've got Waterloo Park at the northern end, Palm Park down here between 2nd and 3rd Streets. Those are two existing parks that we're going to completely transform. We're going to take the area around the confluence of Walla Creek and the lake and make that more park-like, more of a destination. And the project also involves a new park on the site of the existing police station and police station garage called the Refuge. And those buildings would be demolished. Their functions would be relocated, and part of the site would be reclaimed for new development, but part of the site would be reserved as parkland. And I think particularly given what we've seen, I think, and understood more acutely in the past few months about the relationship of law enforcement to our community, we need to use this as an opportunity to help symbolize that renewed relationship that's community-based. And parks, you know, one of the things about parks is that they're so versatile as places of gathering and community, right? So this is Symphony Square, which is another one of the places on our destinations in our system. Collection of historic buildings on Walla Creek between 11th and 12th Streets that we have recently renovated into and put our offices there, but sites for programming and events. I always get a little bit of a lump in my throat when I see this, because obviously we're not doing this exactly right now, but I think we've become increasingly aware of how much we need this kind of experience, and we're going to bring that back when we can. I'm gonna pause there for a second and you know, allow us to talk a little bit more as a group. So that's the overview, big vision: ecology, mobility, park spaces for gathering, connection with nature and with each other.
That's outstanding, Peter. Thank you. And for the audience, we're having some technical difficulties, so I'm sorry you can't get a gallery view. You know, technology is enabler and can also be help. But, you know, so from Waterloo Park, Symphony Square, the Refuge, which I didn't even know about, Palm Park, and then to Lady Bird Lake. That's pretty extraordinary that we'll be walking pretty regularly from, frankly, from my house, which is at UT, all the way to Town Lake.
That's why we're doing it, UT.
Exactly.
Just for you.
Hey, Cotter, you've been involved in a lot of things. I mean, in the tech scene in Austin, as long as I've known you, and you're new to Waterloo Greenway. Why are you allocating some time to this project?
Yeah, no, Eugene, it was an easy decision. I'll be honest, and Peter hates it when I tell this story. But one of our colleagues on the board called me and asked me if I'd be interested in it, and I'd never heard of Waterloo Greenway. I'd never heard of Waller Creek. I was totally unaware of the project, and I really consider it one of the best kept secrets in Austin. I mean, when this thing happens, it's going to be amazing. And one of the I want to let people know, we're going to stop talking in a minute and show you some more pictures, because when you see how ready this thing is and how close we are to launching it, it's amazing. And so the very first piece is coming online shortly. Peter's going to talk about that in a second. But I mean, I think it was such an easy decision. I think it's going to be great for Austin. And, it was fun to be part of. I will say this, it's a public-private partnership. And so the funny part about that is that, the city's contributed a ton of money to this effort, but that means that, the private part is we as corporate citizens, as good citizens of Austin, have to contribute as well. And some of that's our time, like I'm doing, but also our money. And so I think, one of the things I would say to this esteemed audience is not only do we want you to come and enjoy the park and participate in all the greatness, but also we could use your cash. So, I'm never subtle, but
I told you could not solicit my audience, but we can have people right here. I do want, let's find out. So we've got 68 people in the room right now. We had 113 reservations. We'll see if we get how far we get. I'd like to do a poll. Sophia, will you put up the poll? Let's just find out how many people had heard of Waller Creek Conservancy, now Waterloo Greenway. Just take that poll, yes or no, that you've heard of it. You had heard of it before. And I believe it will give us the percentages automatically as people are taking the poll.
So we have 81% people here have heard of it and 19% haven't.
Okay, fantastic. I think Peter filled the room. So that, Cotter, you're probably right, but Peter just manipulating the system. Fake news. No, I'm joking. Hey, so Peter touched on this about how, especially right now in the pandemic, maybe we're having a much greater appreciation for public spaces and for big spaces where we can, socially distance gather. Is this, are you guys seeing any of this? What made you mention that, Peter?
Oh, I think, there's nothing like a pandemic to raise your consciousness and give you perspective. And I think we've all seen how much people crave getting outside, right? Even when the city told us don't go to parks, people just say, screw you, I'm going because I need it. We also, I think, have really come to appreciate how meaningful it is to be with other people in the flesh. And I think, so number one, we've recognized the value of that. I think number two is combine that with the racial pandemic that we've become more aware of, right, in this time. And I firmly believe we've become more aware of it because of this heightened consciousness generally we have during the pandemic. I think that we've realized that it's not just coming together with people of our tribe that's important. It's about coming together with people who are not like us, right? And so creating opportunities, that's what makes cities great. That's what makes cities work, is that you bump into people that are not like you, do not come from the same background you came from, that you do not necessarily gravitate to because of your networks, et cetera. And that diversity, that collision of difference is what makes these places thrive. And so we need places that can serve as a platform for those kinds of experiences, engagement.
Well, look, in Austin, I mean, Austin's history, very deliberately, we created this east-west divide. I mean, I-35, for the audience members that don't know, used to be East Avenue, which is a thriving avenue that rivaled Congress of Black and brown owned businesses. Not a surprise, that's where the city fathers at the time decided to decimate the Black and brown downtown and build I-35. And it was not only, I mean, it was intentionally to separate us. So you talked about looking at it as more of a zipper that stitches the two together. So what are we doing to ensure that this will be an inclusive, welcoming space for people from all people of Austin?
Yeah, so there are lots of ways in which we can work towards that. I mean, I think creating the place is the first part, but that's not going to do it by itself. Part of our mission as an organization is to activate the spaces and to engage the community, both through programming in the spaces, but also going out to the communities and talking to people where they are and making those connections between our place and those communities so that they do feel invited and they feel welcomed. I want to show a few slides of some of the programming that we've been doing to date, which I think part of which is intended to actually begin that invitation.
You know, before you start the slide, I want to just ask how many people have ever been to a Creek show, and let's see if how much participation there's been. So, Sophia, you want to put that poll up if you've ever been to a Creek show? And Peter, yeah. she'll report. So go ahead.
Okay, great. So speaking of Creek Show, you know, we've started using art and as a way to engage the public. And oh wow, okay,
56%, outstanding.
Not enough. So we'll work on that. Yeah, so Creek Show is a program that we've been running for about 5 years now. So every November, and this year, unfortunately, we're going to be doing it in a modified virtual form, given the public health situation. But we commission artists, local artists and designers, to come and do light-based installations on Walla Creek. And this really initially was intended to give people an idea about what was coming here, not just to tell them what was coming, but to show them. And I think we've succeeded at that. Last year, we had 60,000 attendees. And, you know, Melba Watley, who's maybe on the call today and who's one of our founders, always reminds us the importance of free to these programs, is that you can see by providing free programs what a draw it is. And we get people coming from, families coming from Georgetown and South Austin, because it's such an opportunity for those families. And you know, the appetite for these kinds of experiences is really incredible. And we've also been able to layer on programming like music and other family programs to really target certain audiences. So music in particular enabled us to see that there were, you know, go to communities, find the bands that they follow, and then bring those bands to our place. And all of a sudden, then we get that group, right? And they come, and then it grows from there. This is an installation last year that was made from recycled hotel shampoo bottles. So it's a little bit of a commentary on waste by the tourism industry. No offense to them, but and they donated all these goods. And these installations are always sort of actually fabricated by young designers and artists. So it's an incredible contribution that they make to this event and to our city generally. We also are engaged in more permanent, temporary, but more permanent art installations. This was Ai Weiwei's Forever Bicycles that was installed down by the lake in collaboration with the Contemporary. And we've seen by engaging these sort of larger art installations, how they disrupt people's visions and use of the landscape, and how their perception of the city changes as a result of these interventions. And we're going to continue to do these kinds of major artworks into the future. But we also engage with education programming. This is an annual program, nature-based program that we do with the Nature Conservancy. And partnerships are crucial to all these programs. You know, again, we're just a platform. Our ability is to tap into all of the brain trust and creative expertise in our community and bring it to this place and make it more accessible and visible to the public. We also have, and I think, you know, our programmatic lens is really equity driven. So this is a program called Free to Friday, which is it's kind of a workforce development program, if you will, where we partnered with this organization that is a collective of small businesses owned by women of color. And we were hosting in Symphony Square. We will be hosting it there again. And now we're hosting it in the interim and virtually. But it's, again, a way for us to contribute by making visible and giving a home to this great work that's being done out there, and to raise their profile to support them. So programming and these kinds of activations are one way in which we can start to build a much broader constituency that feels a sense of ownership over this place. And it's the beginning, right? This is not easy, right? And it takes time, and it's about building relationships and building trust. And so we're starting, and building it up over time. You're muted, Eugene.
Sorry, I'm going to come back to a Q&A session, but while we've got a couple right now, let me just ask. I mean, Jason Heffron says, how is the water quality in Waller Creek, and will it improve with the project?
Great question. So water quality in Waller Creek is not great, let's be fair, because of the amount of development and pervious, meaning non-pervious cover around it. Certainly, a lot of what we're doing in this project is about long-term water quality benefits. The tunnel is the beginning of that. One of the things that the tunnel does is actually recirculates lake water into lower Waller Creek. So that has an immediate benefit because the lake is pretty clean. But a lot of this creek restoration work that I talked about as the kind of at the sort of the foundation of our project is really about water quality. It's about, again, creating more planted surfaces that can basically filter and clean the water before it gets into our waterways.
And then Jim wants to know, I mean, he's talking about the beauty of the boardwalks, the bridges, the Pfluger walkway, loves sculling on the lake, and is wondering, is the new pedestrian bridge going to bisect the lake with additional pontoons?
No one is more passionate or focused than a rower. Absolutely. Everything we know that the last thing we want to do is impede that public use. So yeah, we'll be designing around that. My guess is, and this is a little plug for Project Connect, right, which is on the ballot in November. Everybody we need this. So I hope everybody will support it. Part of the Project Connect plan includes a transit connection across the lake, sort of in our vicinity of Waterloo Greenway. And right now we're collaborating with Cap Metro to figure out how we can combine that transit connection with a pedestrian connection, and so have those be integrated in one construction project.
You just answered Heather Bailey's question. Thank you. Hey guys, talk a bit. If you're on Cesar Chavez right now, you can't help but notice the problem of the homelessness that we have, and that's been true for a long time all along Waller Creek. What are we doing about the homelessness problem, or the homeless that we're displacing, or Are we plugged into that ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, what are we doing? We're clearly not doing enough. I mean, that's the bottom line. I think that, you know, this place has always, as I said at the beginning, has always been a kind of edge condition, and which is one of the reasons why there's a concentration of people experiencing homelessness who live in and around Walla Creek. I think that this project, among other developments happening in the city, has raised recently much greater consciousness of about the homeless population in our city, and how underserved they are, grossly underserved. You know, we have something like 100 city-owned shelter beds, temporary shelter beds for a city of 1 million people. It's not enough, right? And we need more infrastructure on a bunch of levels. It's not there's no silver bullet, but we need a much broader infrastructure to serve this population. The good news is that I think we have the opportunity, if we act now, to get ahead of it. So if we can bring a brighter light to that condition and be advocates for that population, you know, that's what we need to do. On the ground, certainly in terms of when we have open park spaces, you know, we have to manage it, and we have to work with that community and get them to feel a sense of responsibility for these new public spaces and for the public's use of them. And if you look at other public spaces in other cities around the country, this is totally doable. If you have the right kind of attitude and you engage in it from day one.
Well, thank you. Cotter, anything to add on that?
Now, I will say that's the number one question people ask is, you know, what are you going to do about the homeless? How is the homeless, how are they impacted by the park? And, you know, how do we all share it? It's very much on topic.
So Cotter, you brought this up. Peter, you, the rest of the board, everybody thinks about it every day. It's a public-private partnership without soliciting, Cotter. Tell us, you know, so what is the economic model?
Yeah.
How much is contributed by the city? How much do we have to raise? Where are we? Where are we going to go? Either of you.
So, yeah. So it's the capital project, and we'll talk about that first, and then we'll talk about ongoing operations.
Sure.
Capital project to build it is about $260 million. The city is committed 160 to it. And part of their willingness to do that is that we at the Conservancy committed to raise $100 million towards the capital project. We've raised about 52 million of that 100 million. So the good news is that we've raised a bunch of money and we're well along our way. The bad news is we still have more to raise. Each project has some component of public and private dollars in it. So, you know, as we build this out over time, we will continue to raise money and put money into each of those phases going forward. And our goal is to be done by 2027. So, you know, we've got a little bit of time, but, you know, not forever. The other side is, you know, is ongoing maintenance and operations. So that's a big part of our mission, is that we will act as our responsibility once we complete a project is to maintain and operate that park on behalf of the city as a public park. And so that's an ongoing need that we have. And we think that we can basically support that need through a number of different sources. One is through earned revenue. I'll talk about the Moody Amphitheater, and that will be one source of earned revenue that will go towards maintenance operations. The second is property owner contributions. So getting local property owners through the Downtown Austin Alliance, which is a great partner of ours, to support ongoing maintenance and operations. And then the third is through philanthropy. I mean, we'll always continue to need to raise money, and it will not be a small amount. But you know, that's part of what helps you build a community. So it's not something that we're, you know.
I mean, let's take it to a space that we know. So how Central Park in New York,
Yeah.
and I know that there's a conservancy there. Does a conservancy cover most of the operating cost of that park?
So there is, I'm glad you raised this, because this is again, another part of this national phenomenon that I talked about earlier, is that as, you know, the first thing that cities cut when they get into tough economic times, and we're going to see a lot of that right now, is they cut their parks budget, right? Because it's perceived as being, dispensable, right? Which it really isn't, but it's the first thing historically to go. New York City just was asked, the Parks Commissioner was asked to cut his budget by 20%. Okay, basically from one year to the next. So what we're seeing is that where it's possible with some of these signature urban parks that can attract private philanthropic support, is that cities are increasingly leaning on those philanthropic communities to support those parks and to provide that continuity, good times and bad times. The High Line, for example, 100% of maintenance and operations is privately funded. Central Park Conservancy has been on a trajectory where they're increasing the percentage of private funding over time, right? They're not at 100% yet, I don't think. Discovery Green in Houston, 100% privately funded. Each city's got to look at where its resources are, and public and private, and be able to allocate them sort of optimized way to support these places.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that, Eugene, is one of the things we're trying to do with Waterloo, and they've tried to do, is there is going to be a 5,000 seat amphitheater, which I think we'll show a picture of here in a second. And, obviously people are going to be able to rent that out for their own purposes. I mean, how many offsites did Retail Me Not do over the years at various venues around town? I mean, this would be a fun venue to do it in. There are going to be shows. C3 is programming, I think, hopefully, assuming we all get back to it, 30 shows. It'll be outdoors. So I think if anything, that'll be one of the first places to kind of reopen as we think about life after COVID. There'll be box seats available and regular seats. And so I think we're trying to do what we can to make the project not so much self-sustaining, but at least
generate sources
itself a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I know we're going to get to the next section where Peter's going to walk us through, particularly Waterloo. But I still want to further understand the business model. So increasingly around the country, these signature parks are you privately raised to maintain them. And not only are we talking about the ongoing operations here, right here, you're the 260 million being raised to build the conservancy, you're raising 100 million of it. When Central Park was built, did families in New York contribute to that? Was that a public project?
It's a good question, and I probably should do the real research on it. I think that private philanthropy has always been involved in building these places. This whole notion of cities essentially delegating or using private philanthropy as their agent, really started in the 70s with Central Park, right? And was a response to the disinvestment that residents around the park saw in that place. So it's that, I think this is a growing and more recent phenomenon. Certainly when they were built, the intention was this is a public park, and the city was going to support it. And I think, and they did for a long time,
Is it inaccurate to look at maybe the combination of, Waterloo Greenway and the Lady Bird hike and bike trail and the Butler hike and bike trail, and as our Central Park?
It's exactly what it is.
Okay.
I mean, that's exactly what it is. And in some ways, if you think about it in terms of the ethos of the city, right? Central Park as a rectangle, right, that's carved into this grid speaks to that city's urban fabric. These public spaces that are built around natural waterways really speak to our core DNA, in a similar way, or if not more, right? Because they're really tapping into who we are.
What occurs to me is I remember about 12 years ago, and think Tommy Meredith's still in the audience. Tommy was telling me when we were doing the Featherlight track, he says, look, East Austin is going to be East Downtown Austin. And I think particularly as you remove this, concrete barrier that is Waller Creek today and create this zipper of, this public space, maybe it does extend the welcome mat of downtown and the footprint of downtown. I remember in New York, West Side versus East Side was a big deal.
So, Eugene, that's the subject for the follow-up, Culturality Live, right? I mean, you just cracked up. I mean, that's a huge discussion. I mean, think about the future of I-35 and all the other things, the convention center expansion and the MAC and Palm School, the innovation district, all the things that are happening right along that seam have the ability to change the relationship of these parts of the city in pretty fundamental ways. So we are one piece of an assemblage of urban interventions that is going to change Austin.
Well, Peter, walk us through some of the projects, some of the details.
Great. Yeah. So I'm going to go our first phase, which is Waterloo Park, and show you what's happening there in some detail. So Waterloo Park is at the northern end of our project. It's the largest park in the system. And one of the reasons why we started here is because, sorry, see if I can advance my slide. There we go. It's 11 acres and it's got sort of a number of, if not all of the various components of the larger project built into it. So phase one, coming out of the gate, we can kind of show people what this larger entire project is about. We have a big gathering space with the Moody Amphitheater at the center, 5,000 person capacity. But then there are a whole series of other park spaces and garden spaces, some of which are really built around the emergence of water. There's a creek restoration area in this park. So there are a whole range of experiences built into this one project. And yes, at the center of it is this new, what is really going to be a public amphitheater for Austin. We do have a relationship with C3 and Live Nation to produce contemporary music in the amphitheater, but we will, over time, build out that program to really showcase the whole range of Austin's creative community. And I think use this as a programmatic anchor to draw people from all over the region. So yeah, so this is a recent photo. You can see we're well along our way and under construction. We're scheduled to open next spring. You can see the stage and the canopy of the Moody Amphitheater there on the right. And then we just recently put in the first part of grass in our great lawn, which has been great to see sort of the green popping out. And you can see where we are. We're in the shadow of the Capitol, right in downtown, much more central than I think a lot of people realize. There's another shot of the amphitheater. You can see the first thing that we actually did with the construction is build the park out over the creek and out over the inlet pond for the flood control tunnel to kind of take the park back from the tunnel, increase the park space, and really put the park first. And that really is the mantra for everything we do about the architecture, is how do we create a park that feels immersive in terms of its experience of nature, at the same time as you sort of feel the energy of the city around you. There's another shot from the top of the lawn looking to the amphitheater. So great sight lines. But part of the idea behind the architecture of the canopy, one is that we have a Capitol View corridor. So we're in this very tight sandwich, which is why we have this very thin profile on the structure. But the idea is, how do you create a place that feels as good, if not better, when we're not having a show as when we are? And so really investing in the architecture to feel like it's part of the park. And in many cases, the structure itself really feels like just an extension of the tree canopy moving through the site. So it's made up of a series of steel and aluminum beams that are stacked up in this trellis. You can see it's got a glass roof on the top. You can see how the light filters through and then casts these amazing shadows on the curved walls underneath it. Has this really delicate texture to it, which is, I think, uncommon for an amphitheater. Usually there's sort of these dark huckling sheds that feel kind of sad and lonely when you're not in a performance. We wanted to really turn that upside down and focus on the experience when it's just part of the park. We're working with this amazing architect, Tom Pfeiffer and partners, who designed the amphitheater. Part of the experience also is to allow the public onto the stage. So we have a series of steps and a ramp that come down off of the stage so that, again, when we're not in performance mode, people can come up and have lunch, take a meeting, roll out their fantasy of performing in front of 5,000 people, whatever you want. But, and it's this giant shade structure, shade landscape, if you will, in the park. The structure is constantly changing depending on where the light is. It's almost like a giant light fixture. This is from looking uphill from 15th Street looking south. And then here's the view looking north from 12th Street. You can see it juxtaposed to the football stadium. You can now see all those different layers of steel that are stacked up. And so the structure is kind of constantly changing depending on where you are in elevation and where the sun is. At the middle of that slope along Trinity Street, there's an entrance plaza, which actually comes onto the roof of the amphitheater structure and then leads down into the park through this grove of columns. And there's another shot of the amphitheater at sunset. You can see how all those individual beams pick up the light, fading light at night. So that's the amphitheater, right? That's one part of the experience of Waterloo Park. But a big part of the experience is the southern half of the park, which is totally different and a totally different experience, and really about, again, being immersed in the place of nature, built around a series of heritage oak trees on the site with a series of paths that carve through those trees and through garden spaces that are built in around them. We've really tried to create a kind of critical mass of planted areas. So all of this ground that you see will be planted with native perennials and grasses. So you really feel like you're out in the hill country. And I think that's particularly important for folks that maybe don't get a lot of opportunity to get out in the hill country. We're bringing the hill country to them. We've actually moved a lot of trees around the site. This is a tree that came from the Capitol complex that was scheduled to be demolished as part of the construction of their underground parking garage on North Congress. We put together a deal between the city and the state. Yes, that is possible. We did it, and we brought this tree to Waterloo Park, 350,000 pounds.
How much does it cost to move a tree like that?
I will say it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you've got to take down light poles and street stuff, because it's bigger than anything in the street. Not to mention you've got to rent the space shuttle mover that it moves on.
So if there's anyone in the audience that wants to name that tree for $100,000, no, never mind.
We're happy to talk. Yeah, so here's an example of that landscape with all these little plants that are going in. This is from a couple of days ago, and we have this scramble path that's really designed for kids, to sort of a way for them to feel like they're completely lost in this sort of natural wonderscape, and they can kind of lose their way and then discover their imagination. We also have, in order to provide, we have a lot of topography on the site. In order to provide a very gentle, easy route down into the park, we've created this long serpentine walkway that basically it gives us the length to manage that steep slope. And it's this sort of floating flying carpet that starts on the ground, but then ends up floating in the air, and the landscape sort of flows underneath it. But you can see when you get on it, you have these wide open views of the city and of the park below. And so the experience of the park is this really sort of three-dimensional theatrical experience. And as that elevated walkway comes down and lands back down on the ground, it creates another mini amphitheater where we can do smaller programs or weddings or fire breathers or whatever. That's a view of that as it comes down, and it's kind of right on the view as everybody coming into the park will see as they walk down. As the path continues down to the park, we have a series of really family-oriented amenities. There's a series of play structures built into the landscape, including a slide that's milled out of solid granite blocks. And really, these are invitations to kids to see the entire landscape as something to be played in and explored. Adjacent to that, we have a public restroom building designed by Michael Shue, fantastic local architect, with hookups for food trailers. Yes, food and beverage are a park program, so that we provide amenities to the public, all the time. But also, this is an example actually, where we started thinking about we were going to have a brick and mortar restaurant in the park. Trying to elevate what we offer to the public, but we went out to the community, and the community is like, you should do something a little bit more often. And they actually really pushed us to do food trailers. And what we realized is that we can use food as a program to invite specific constituencies into the park. And if it doesn't work, we switch them out, we bring something else in. So it gives us that ability to adapt and be flexible and be intentional about, what is the message we're sending by the kind of food that we're offering in the park. The design of the building itself is really cool. It's got public restrooms, but it has this breezeway with a planter in the back, so it really feels like a grotto that's kind of built into the landscape. Everything about the architecture on the site is really about foregrounding the landscape and making that more visible. And then adjacent to that, we have this really beautiful big wooden deck, which actually would be the Meredith family heritage deck, and built around these two existing trees. So you have a scenario where family comes, they get a meal at the food trucks, the parents can relax with a glass of wine while their kids run away into the landscape, and they're all visible, but everybody's sufficiently far apart so that they feel independent. And it's all happening in the middle of downtown. And then you get a view looking from the deck back on the amphitheater, and you can see how the amphitheater almost feels like it's kind of nestled into the treescape, and yet it's this sort of bright glowing thing that it just captures the sunlight. And there's the overhead view of the park with the amphitheater. You can kind of see the glass roof, which is built into that lattice work structure with the lawn, and then those park spaces to the south. So,
Wow.
Waterloo Park, open next spring. We're really excited to be able to share it more broadly with the public, and hope you all will be a part of that.
Outstanding, Peter. Thank you. And listen, congratulations on getting Tommy and Lynn to let you name something for the Meredith family. I have wrestled with that. They've done a lot more in this community than they let us name in their honor. This is rhetorical from me, but it's for the rest of the audience. Who's the Moody Foundation? Why Moody Amphitheater?
So the Moody Foundation is it's a charitable foundation that was, I don't know when it's founded, but generations ago by the Moody family based in Galveston. Ross Moody lives in Austin and he's the chair of the foundation. And they're focused on charity all over Texas. So they're a Texas-based foundation. And they made a that's hilarious, $15 million gift towards the construction of the amphitheater. And so we're naming the amphitheater in their honor. But they do great work all over Texas.
Yeah, and just for our members to know, they've made huge investments in Austin. Ross and his son and his daughter, and appropriately so, we'll be seeing a whole lot more of Moody Foundation in many public spaces, Barton Springs and UT. I think the new basketball stadium is going to be the Moody Stadium. So congratulations on bringing them in as well. We've got just a few minutes, and I've got a few questions from the audience. So let's see here. There's a couple of statements. Jim Breyer is talking about he loves green space in Austin. It's treasured, and this is a welcome expansion. TTF has made great contributions to the hike and bike trail surroundings. Will TTF extend the scope of their assistance to Waterloo Greenway? Texas Trail Foundation or?
Well, the Trail Foundation. So,
okay.
Yeah, so the Trail Foundation, we're kind of partner, peer organizations. We have similar mission. I think Trail Foundation is really trying to expand their scope to do more in terms of maintenance and operations for the trail. So they're going in that direction also. And certainly, their space that they're the stewards of and our space that we're the stewards of intersect down where the creek meets the lake. And so we're always trying to figure out how do we work together and support one another, because we're both working towards this much bigger idea, each in our respective areas.
David Judson, grabbed on to the comment that you spoke to briefly about the connection between I-35, the legacy, and kind of the choreography of whether we're going to build, whether we're going to bury the freeway and connect east to west in an urban landscape. Just briefly, where are we in those conversations, Peter?
So we're in a better place than we ever have been. That's the big headline. Texas Transportation Commission last spring approved another $4.5 billion for the I-35 corridor project to fund the lowering of I-35. So there's a very strong chance that is going to happen in that way, which is amazing. The Downtown Austin Alliance has led a collection, sort of a community-based effort to begin to reimagine what, if I-35 was lowered, how could the surface be imagined in a way to really serve the neighborhood in a truly equitable fashion? I think everybody recognizes that this is that what you were starting to hint at earlier, Eugene. The eastward expansion of downtown is not all great, right? There are costs associated with that. And so the question is, how can you use this reimagination of this public corridor in a way so that it has much more equitable benefits? And that envisioning process is just starting, and they're doing a lot of public forums, so I really encourage people to participate in that.
And I know Diane Land, the mayor's wife, had raised some money to explore looking at a cap, which of course the Arts District in Dallas did over the freeway there. Yeah.
So I think the idea has evolved since Diane's efforts there. I mean, it was a crucial part of the process to get people
right.
thinking in that way. And I think certainly was part of what led to the Texas TxDOT, going in this direction. But I think that the ideas around what would go on the cap, I think are more varied than just doing, say, a linear park on that in the way that Dallas did.
We have a question from Beth. She loves that this connects an attribute of Austin to our heritage in music and performance. What about visual arts? Will there be commissioned pieces unique to Austin along the Walla Creek?
Absolutely. It's always been, we've started doing that. Art has always been part of our core function. It's one of the greatest things about Austin, and we want to use this space as a way to celebrate and promote it.
So, gentlemen, thank you so much. 1 minute each as a closing or an ask or whatever you'd like to tell us. Why don't we start with you, Cotter?
Sure. So like we said, we are public-private, so keep us in mind. And I do think, though, all kidding aside, I think there are so many people that are going to be interested in, how many of us have enjoyed ACL Live and have seats there, and they're going to be something similar here. And so as those become available, I think people are going to be really interested in learning more about that. I think that the amphitheater being available for rental will be exciting, and I think people will enjoy that. But more importantly than the money stuff is this we're about to have this amazing asset here in Austin, and I want people to be excited for it. So hopefully they are.
Didn't you tell me there's going to be boxes in the amphitheater, much as there is at the ACL theater?
That's exactly right.
Cool. Hey, and listen, I'm going to end on Peter, but in the interim, if anyone wants to get on the Waterloo Greenway's mailing list so that you get more updates, type your email in the chat and we will send that information to Peter and the organization. Peter, with the final minute.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is, you are now deputized officially as ambassadors of this project. You have to go out and evangelize about what we're doing within your networks and communities. The only way we're successful with this project is if as many people as possible are involved in it. And so we really just want to make our tent bigger. So just please really encourage you all to stay with us, stay involved, help us make it happen, and then enjoy it with your fellow Austinites.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I know Chris Matson's in the audience, who's been working tirelessly on this project for a long time. And of course, Tommy Meredith, who is an emeritus chairman and one of the co-founders. My friends Melba Watley and Melanie Barnes are also co-founders. Thank you guys for what you're bringing to Austin. We're very excited about it.
Thank you, Eugene.
All right, audience,
Thank you,
remember you
Eugene.
can put your name in your email in the chat. We'll pass that on to Waterloo Greenway so they can put you on their mailing list. And our next Culturati Live will be October 28th. It is, are we at the breaking point? How do managers survive? And so, good topic.
I'll be signing up for that. All right.
Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
Eugene.
Thanks.